In 2026, millions of Americans may face a hit they are not prepared for: a Social Security check that stops growing while the cost of living keeps climbing. The government's own trustees say the system's reserves will run dry by 2033. When that happens, incoming payroll taxes will only cover about 80% of promised benefits. And the early pressure begins long before that date. Medical inflation runs close to 10% for many older adults. Medicare Part B premiums jump again in 2026, rising from $185 to over $202. Housing swallows 1/3 of the typical senior's income. For older renters, it can reach more than 70%. Yet the raise for next year is only 2.8%, barely $50 to $60 for many households. That gap is the real threat. It widens month after month, and once it opens, it rarely closes. Stay with me, this may be the most important warning you hear this year. 1. The truth behind the trust fund. When you look at the Social Security system, the way it actually works, not the way people imagine it, you start to see why so many older Americans are nervous about the next few years. The numbers are not falling off a cliff today, but the ground under the system is slowly shifting. And once you understand how that shift works, everything about 2026 starts to make more sense. Let's start with the simplest truth. Social Security is not a savings account. It is not money you tucked away in your working years waiting for you at retirement, like a private nest egg. It runs on a much simpler flow. People who are working today pay into the system, and that money goes right back out to people who are collecting benefits right now. Your check depends on the strength of that stream, and over time that stream has been getting thinner. For decades, the number of workers supporting each retiree has been shrinking. People are having fewer children. People are living longer. A huge generation has moved into retirement, and the workforce is not expanding fast enough to keep the balance steady. That imbalance is why Social Security has had to lean harder on its reserves, which is the trust fund you hear about on the news. Those reserves are not endless. The government's own reports show they will run out in the early years of the next decade. When that day comes, the system will still have money coming in from payroll taxes, but not enough to pay the full amounts people were promised. It's like trying to run a house on half the income you used to have. You can keep the lights on, but you will feel every missing dollar. Now, here's where 2026 enters the picture. The system does not wait until the last minute to feel the pressure. Long before the trust fund hits, empty lawmakers start talking about trimming costs, adjusting formulas, tightening eligibility, or slowing down benefit growth. They might not call it a cut. They might not say the words out loud, but when the math stops working, the adjustments begin. And recent discussions inside Washington circles show that the window for those conversations is not 10 years away. It is here right in front of us. You can see why. The reserve line keeps dropping. The worker line is not rising fast enough. The stream that feeds Social Security is carrying more weight than it was built for. And if nothing changes, that weight eventually becomes too much. The system has been moving in this direction for years, but 2026 marks a point where the warning lights grow harder to ignore. I want you to picture it the way you'd picture a car climbing a long hill. At the bottom, everything feels fine. Halfway up, the engine starts to strain. Near the top, you hear the sound shift. Nothing breaks all at once, but you know the moment is coming when the car can't push any harder. That's where Social Security is right now, not broken, not gone, but straining in a way you can finally hear if you listen closely. And to understand why that strain shows up first in your monthly check, not by cutting the number, but by freezing the value behind it, we need to look at how your buying power quietly slips away, even when the check looks the same. That's where we're headed next. To the purchasing power freeze. When people think about Social Security falling behind, they picture the number on the check going down. But the real hit doesn't happen that way. The number usually stays the same. What changes is everything around it. Prices rise, bills grow, and the check that once covered your life starts losing its strength little by little. And the hardest part is that this shift is so quiet. Many people don't notice it until they feel it in their grocery cart or their medicine cabinet. Let's talk about what purchasing power really means. It's simple. It's not about how many dollars you get. It's about what those dollars can buy. And for older Americans, that gap between the check and the cost of life has been opening wider each year. Start with the raise for 2026. It's only 2.8%. For many households, that works out to around $50 or $60 a month. Not nothing, but not much either. Meanwhile, the cost of essentials keeps pushing up in ways that add pressure month after month. Medical care is the biggest example. People over 65 spend a lot more on healthcare than any other age group. It's not an opinion, it's what the numbers show. Older Americans spend nearly twice as much on healthcare as working-age adults and more than 5 times as much as children. And in many areas, medical costs rise close to double-digit levels year after year. So when you get a $50 raise but your pharmacy bill jumps by 80 or 90, the math doesn't work in your favor. Then we have Medicare Part B. Most people have that premium taken straight out of their Social Security check. For 2026, that premium is going up again from about $185 to over $202. That's nearly $18 gone before your check even reaches your hands. And remember, that's not a one-time charge. It's every single month. For a lot of people, that increase alone eats up a third or even half of the raise they're getting. Housing adds another layer of weight. According to federal reports, older homeowners spend about 1/3 of their income on housing. Older renters spend even more, sometimes over 70%. When rent rises, there's no discount for being retired and no pause button you can hit. It just takes whatever room was left in the budget. So imagine a household trying to balance all 3 medical bills rising faster than anything else, Medicare premiums climbing on schedule, and housing absorbing a huge share of income. Even with the 2.8% raise, the check doesn't stretch the way it used to. It can't. The numbers simply don't match the reality of daily life. That's why many older adults say the 2026 raise doesn't actually help them stay ahead. A recent survey showed that more than 3 out of 4 people aged 50 and older believe the increase is not enough to keep up with real costs. You don't need a survey to understand why. You can see it in every bill that shows up at the end of the month. This is how the freeze feels. Not as a cut on paper, but as a slow squeeze in real life. The check keeps its number, but it loses its strength. And once your purchasing power starts slipping, every new bill becomes heavier than the last. Which brings us to the key question: if the check isn't shrinking, then why is the value behind it falling so fast, and how can the system allow that to happen in the first place? 3. The calculation trap. A single detail sits quietly in the background of Social Security, a detail so small most people never hear about it. Yet it holds the power to shape an entire year of someone's life. It's not a vote, not a debate, not even a public decision. It's a 3-month reading, a short window that can determine whether your benefit grows or whether it stays locked in place while your bills keep rising. This window runs from July through September. During those 3 months, the government measures something called the CPIW, which is just a list of prices for workers' everyday spending. Not seniors, not retirees. Workers. And whatever that index does in those 90-plus days becomes the basis for the cost of living adjustment the following year. If the average goes up, you get a raise. If it barely moves, the raise shrinks. If it goes nowhere, the raise disappears. Think about how narrow that is. A 12-month life judged by a 3-month snapshot. The entire year struggles, medical appointments, rent renewals, grocery bills, insurance premiums, all filtered through a short stretch of data that might not look anything like your actual expenses. If prices cool for just a little while, even briefly, the formula treats that as proof that life has settled down, even if the rest of the year felt nothing like that. This has happened before. In 2010, 2011, and 2016, the formula produced zero adjustment. People were still paying rising rents and higher medical costs, but the CPIW window had flattened at the wrong time. The system responded the only way its rules allowed it: froze the raise. Not because older Americans didn't need the help, but because the narrow reading didn't show enough movement. The formula followed the rulebook, even if the rulebook didn't reflect reality. Here is where the trap forms. CPIW focuses heavily on things younger workers buy: transportation, fuel, clothing, and other day-to-day items. Seniors, on the other hand, spend far more on healthcare, housing, and basic needs that often rise faster than the worker index. So even when life gets more expensive for retirees, the index used to measure inflation may barely shift. And when the index barely shifts, the raise shrinks. It's not personal. It's not targeted. It's simply how the math works. Imagine you kept track only of your summer grocery bills. If those bills happened to dip for a few weeks because of a sale or local oversupply, you might think your yearly food costs looked better. But the minute fall arrived, prices could snap right back up. The Social Security formula works almost the same way. A moment of calm can erase months of pressure. The limitation isn't hidden. It's written plainly into the system. The goal was never to measure senior spending perfectly, only to tie benefits to a familiar index the government already used. But as the cost of living shifts and as older adults carry heavier medical and housing loads, that choice becomes harder to defend. The formula simply wasn't built with retirees in mind, and the gap shows up most clearly in years like 2026, when a narrow reading can hold back a raise even while real expenses keep rising. The strange part is how silent this whole process feels. No headlines, no announcements, no long speeches. The formula runs, the 3-month average settles, and the number becomes official. It's quick, it's quiet, and it affects millions of people who never saw the calculation behind it. And once that number is locked in the next place, the pressure shows itself as not in a chart or a report. It's in the way an ordinary household tries to stretch a check that can't keep up anymore. 4 lived reality collapse. Some pressures don't make noise. They don't arrive with headlines or warnings. They just collect one bill at a time until a household feels smaller than it used to. That is where many older Americans find themselves now, not in crisis, not in comfort, but in a tightening space where every choice costs more than it did last year. Start with the simple categories, the ones nobody can avoid. Rent, groceries, prescriptions, doctor visits, premiums, utilities. Each one climbs on its own schedule. Each one takes a little more room. And even before emotion enters the picture, the math alone shows how heavy it all becomes. Rent sits at the top of the list. For many older renters, housing takes more than half their income. Some spend well over 70% just to keep a roof overhead. That number isn't theoretical, it's the government's own reporting. A woman in Arizona told her local paper, "My rent went up $90 this year. My check went up $50." You don't need a calculator to see how that works out. She wasn't angry, she just sounded tired. Then comes healthcare, the constant weight no one can fully prepare for. Older adults spend almost twice as much on medical care as working-age adults, and that gap keeps widening. A retired bus driver in Ohio shared, "I have 3 medications I refill every month. 2 of them went up. The raise I got from Social Security didn't even cover the difference." His voice wasn't dramatic. It was matter of fact, like someone describing the weather. Medicare adds another twist. When premiums rise, and they almost always do, that increase is taken straight out of the Social Security check. For 2026, that deduction grows again. $18 might not sound like much on its own, but when the raise is only $50 or $60, it cuts deep. A couple in Florida said they now open their statements with a sense of bracing, because as the husband put it, every year we lose a little more of the check before we even see it. And beyond those big categories, there are the small daily cuts that slowly reshape a life. People stretch groceries farther than they should. They skip refilling a cream or a supplement. They drive less because gas is too high. They push off dental visits. They look harder at every receipt. None of these choices show up in the CPI chart, but they show up in how a person carries themselves. This is the part that doesn't get talked about often, how a steady check still creates a shrinking world. A man in Indiana explained it in one sentence. "It feels like my life keeps getting smaller, even though the number on the paper stays the same." That line stays with you because it doesn't come from fear, it comes from clarity. And once you see this pattern, the pressure becomes unmistakable. The rent takes more space. The premiums carve out another slice. The prescriptions demand their share. And every month, the check tries to stretch across all of it, even as the distance keeps widening. On paper, the numbers look organized. In real life, they tighten around a person until the smallest expense feels sharper than it should. The formulas and measurements may explain how we got here, but they cannot show how it feels inside a home where every dollar has a job and none of them reach far enough. That story isn't written in charts. It's written in daily decisions, quiet sacrifices, and the slow narrowing of what someone can afford to keep. And once you understand how the pressure builds inside a single household, the next step is seeing how that pressure spreads outward across neighborhoods, businesses, and whole communities that depend on these checks to stay in motion. 5 national ricochet. When 66 million Social Security checks stop growing, the strain doesn't stay inside one home. It spreads. It moves through neighborhoods, stores, clinics, tax offices, and whole regions that rely on steady spending from older Americans just to keep the wheels turning. This isn't personal pressure anymore, this is economic gravity, and it pulls everything toward it. Start with something simple. Every dollar of Social Security benefits creates about $2 of economic activity across the country. That isn't a guess, that's from national retirement studies tracking how these checks flow through local economies. So when benefits barely grow, the slowdown doubles on the other side. It touches shops, service workers, pharmacies, and even state budgets. In many small towns, older adults make up a large share of paying customers. Some rural counties count on Social Security income for more than half of their household revenue. When that money stops stretching, it doesn't just affect the person receiving it. It affects the store trying to stay open. It affects the diner hoping for a breakfast crowd. It affects the nurse who depends on regular clinic visits for stable work hours. Once demand softens, everything downstream feels softer too. Look at healthcare systems. Adults over 65 account for more than 1/3 of all personal health spending in the United States. Hospitals and clinics depend on that steady volume to keep their doors open. When seniors cut back skipping appointments, delaying treatment, spreading out visits, those cuts ripple back into the system. It might start with lighter schedules, but it can turn into layoffs, reduced hours, or whole departments shrinking. One small shift in patient flow becomes a larger shift in a community's access to care. Then there's the business sector. Older Americans are responsible for hundreds of billions of dollars in spending each year. In 2023 alone, Social Security benefits supported more than $1.6 trillion in total economic output when you count the multiplier effect. So when checks flatten, companies see fewer purchases. Local businesses face tighter margins. Some start offering fewer services. Others cut staff. A frozen benefit doesn't stay frozen. It pushes the whole local cycle into slower motion. State and local governments feel it too. Social Security spending generates more than $300 billion in tax revenue nationwide when you add federal, state, and local collections. If seniors pull back, those numbers fall. And when budgets shrink, the cuts often land on places already stretched thin: public transport, community clinics, senior centers, housing programs. The freeze moves from a single check to an entire support system. And remember, this pressure is hitting at a time when older Americans are becoming a larger share of the population. In some counties, they are the economy. Remove growth from their spending power and you slow the entire region. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily, the same way a town changes when a factory leaves. The impact isn't loud, but it's everywhere. This isn't the same burden we saw in the last segment. That was about households tightening. This is about towns tightening, states tightening. The country adjusting to a quieter flow of money from millions of people who once kept everything moving just by their daily routines. And here's the hard part. If this is what happens when benefits barely grow, what happens when the system reaches the years when the trust fund runs out and new rules begin to shape the checks themselves? What kind of future takes shape when the slowdown becomes the new normal? 6. The shadow after. A freeze rarely ends with one quiet year. It often signals a period when the system begins to show more of its long-term strain, step by step. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden, just a slow reveal of where the numbers may be heading. Right now, the projections show the retirement trust fund running short in the early years of the next decade. If that happens without any new laws, payroll taxes would still cover most of the promised benefits, though not all. Estimates place that share somewhere in the high 70s. That figure sits firmly in the middle of the discussion, not leaning toward one argument or another. It simply reflects where the math stands today. There are different proposals being studied. Some focus on adjusting how benefits grow each year. Others consider raising the full retirement age for younger workers over long timelines. Some look at adding new revenue streams instead of slowing benefit growth. And a few combine several ideas, spreading the load across the system. None of these possibilities move quickly. Even if Congress agreed on a path, the changes would take years to phase in. Medicare adds another layer. Premiums have a long history of rising, and if that continues, the net amount older adults receive could shift even without changes to Social Security itself. That isn't a forecast, only an acknowledgement of how past trends have behaved. All of these pieces together create a picture that is neither rosy nor bleak. It is simply open-shaped by decisions that have not yet been made. What is clear is that the next decade will carry adjustments of some kind. Maybe small, maybe broader, but likely gradual. Programs this large rarely change with a sudden jolt. They bend before they shift. In the middle of all this, people still have to live their daily lives. And even with uncertainty, there are steady ways to prepare without expecting either disaster or rescue. One helpful step is keeping track of your own essential costs. Prices for rent, food, and medical care can rise faster than general inflation, and noticing your own patterns early gives you time to adjust before the pressure builds. It doesn't require spreadsheets, just a simple record of the bills that set the tone for each month. Another step is reviewing insurance plans with a bit more attention. Premiums and coverage can change subtly from year to year. Even a small difference in medication copays or doctor visit costs can add up when income stays steady. For many people, choosing the right plan becomes as important as the size of the benefit itself. Planning with a buffer also helps. instead of assuming future increases will match rising expenses. Treating any bump as extra breathing room keeps expectations grounded in what past years have delivered. It's a softer, steadier way to navigate a fixed income when the program itself is moving in slow motion. Community resources can make a quiet but meaningful difference. Local programs that help with prescription costs, utilities, transportation, or food support often go unused simply because people don't know they exist. They don't replace the benefit, but they help the benefit go further. And staying connected to family, to friends, to neighbors matters more than many people realize. Financial strain often feels heavier when carried alone. Sharing information, pooling small resources, or simply talking things through can ease some of the pressure that numbers don't show. None of these steps solve the system. They are not substitutes for policy or reform, but they give people room to breathe while the larger decisions unfold. They offer steadiness in a moment when the program is balancing on long-term questions. The future of Social Security will not be shaped in a single moment. It will unfold through choices, debates, and slow-moving adjustments. The first shifts are quiet, but they're the ones that tell you which direction the years ahead may take. We need to agree. The road ahead won't be simple. Many households are already carrying more weight than they should, and the pressure of a slowing system is real. But even in a difficult moment, there is space for steadiness. A clearer understanding of how these changes unfold gives people room to plan to adapt and to hold on to the parts of life that matter most. Systems evolve, and so do the communities that depend on them. Hard days come, but so do better ones. And with the right information, each of us can move into the next chapter with more confidence than fear.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.